After the Supreme Court struck down his student loan debt forgiveness plan, President Biden described his administration's next steps towards providing some relief for student borrowers, ripped Republicans for appointing those Supreme Court justices in the first place, and then bluntly shut down a bad faith question by a reporter. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe and enjoy the video. All right, so as we've discussed in virtually every video today, earlier today, the Supreme Court, the regressively conservative majority on the Supreme Court, to be very precise, shut down the halted student debt relief program initiated by President Biden, I think back in August of last year. And shortly after the decision was made, President Biden announced that he would be issuing remarks in response later on that day and would also describe steps that the Biden administration would take towards correcting, or I shouldn't say correcting, towards providing at least some relief to student loan borrowers. You could tell that they were kind of prepared for this. I imagine in addition to just general contingency planning, the White House was, if they were gambling, probably betting on the regressively conservative majority of the Supreme Court to bend over backwards and use whatever, jurisprudence they could pull out of their hats to strike down the law. So President Biden did issue remarks, and we'll play some clips from that. But generally speaking, the gist is this. So it was a COVID-era piece of legislation called the HEROES Act that Biden essentially grounded his authority in to cancel large swaths of student debt that the Supreme Court struck down. They were like, listen, this piece of legislation, we don't think that it grants the Secretary of Education. Yes, there can be waivers. Yes, there can be this and that and relief and waivers, whatever, but you can't just cancel the debt. We reject the interpretation that that's what they meant. So instead, President Biden is like, look, we're gonna do what we can to provide some student loan debt relief as much as we can, and we're going to base it in the Higher Education Act. Now, those of you who have been following this issue might get really hyped because you might be thinking, okay, damn, yes, this is good. This is dark branded energy, because many progressive officials, many progressive commentators, many progressive legal scholars argue that the Higher Education Act of 1965 affords the president and the Secretary of Education to literally with a swipe of the pen, or stroke of the pen, eliminate all student debt, just wholesale, unilaterally. Now, again, that view has a lot of support, but there's also quite a bit of opposition to it as well from the legal community. And unfortunately, whether you like it or not, President Biden, if you give him kind of a split decision, he will always take the more conservative route. And I say this as somebody who genuinely and generally supports President Biden, but he is, at his core, personally, a moderate. Now, his administration is very progressive, relatively speaking, but again, if you put him in a 50-50 situation, this is a man who will hedge his bets. So instead, he's going to try to use the Higher Education Act to provide some debt relief, but he didn't go into specifics over what specific provisions and what all that would entail. Now, he did say that he has directed the Education Department to essentially not report borrowers who miss student loan payments, who are late with them, because the student loan payments will resume. That is a condition of the debt ceiling deal negotiated between the president and Speaker McCarthy, so that unfortunately is inevitable. But for 1 year, the Education Department, if you miss a student loan payment or if you're late on it, the Education Department will not report you in a way that could cause you to default on your loan for 1 year, okay? So that's some specific policy that he mentioned as well. He also said the Education Department has also proposed changes to benefit borrowers on an income-based repayment plan. A draft of the changes released in January said they would reduce payments on undergraduate loans to 5% of discretionary income. It's currently at 10. Biden's going to drop it down to 5. So that's, again, something. Certainly nowhere near as sexy or as eye-catching as even the original plan, which was $10,000 to $20,000 of relief, which was relatively targeted. I think for $20,000 if you were a Pell Grant recipient, and $10,000 if you were just a general loan borrower and you made under $125,000. So that's the Cliff Notes version. I want to play a couple of clips here. First, in which the president kind of tears into Republicans, as well he should, about the situation, and then another clip in which he gets into it a bit with a reporter. So let's hear the criticism of the Republican Party first.
We're trying to provide students with $10,000 to relief. By comparison, the average amount forgiven in the PPP, for the pandemic loan program, average amount forgiven was $70,000. Now a kid making 60,000 bucks, trying to pay back his bills, asking for $10,000 in relief. Come on, the hypocrisy is stunning. You can't help a family making 75 grand a year, but you can help a millionaire and you have your debt forgiven. My plan would not only have been life-changing for millions of Americans, it would have been good for the American economy, freeing millions of Americans from the crushing burden of student debt. More homes would have been bought, more businesses would have been started, more couples would have had the confidence to start a family. Millions of people would have felt they could get on with their lives. These Republicans blocked all that. Now, in addition to the hypocrisy, some of these Republican Congress are shamelessly pushing to advance a bill in the coming weeks that gives hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and handouts to the wealthiest Americans. They still haven't given up on making permanent a $2 trillion tax cut that they never paid for. Never paid for. $2 trillion. So let me be clear. For Republicans in Congress, it's not about reducing the deficit. It's not about fairness in forgiving loans. It's only about forgiving loans that they have to pay. Today, the Supreme Court sided with them. I believe the court's decision to strike down my student debt relief program as a mistake was wrong. I'm not going to stop fighting to deliver borrowers what they need, particularly those at the bottom end of the economic scale.
So there you have it. The president's pointing out that there is at least an ideological hypocrisy involved here, because it does seem like, given every opportunity, the Republican Party bends over backwards to provide some sort of relief or just relief, some sort of relief or benefit towards the rich, be it, again, a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich that was passed under President Trump. They want to make it permanent, or, again, the forgiveness of PPP loans, as unfortunately President Biden said at one point, but no, PPP loans during the pandemic, many of which, I mean, we know, as a matter of fact, that there was quite a bit of fraud in that program, that the I assume it's like the IRS or the Department of the Treasury, like, they're relentlessly pursuing. But in many cases, President Biden has called out members of Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene. You know, she was at least I think it was like a six-figure beneficiary of PPP loans for her business during COVID, that they were forgiven, and a bunch of others as well. But when it comes to providing relief for millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of American student loan borrowers, despite the predatory practices, the ever-increasing rise in higher education costs, and the fact that that money would be going into the economy in a much more direct and productive way if it was being used to buy houses or buy things instead of just paying debt. So morally and economically, I think the benefits are overwhelming. Now, I do want to play another clip here, in which the president gets a little testy with a very, I would argue, bad faith question from a reporter, but we'll play the clip and go from there.
Very, very much for listening. We're going to get this done, God willing. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope. The question was whether or not I would do even more than was requested. What I did, I thought, was appropriate and was able to be done and would get done. I didn't give borrowers false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yeah, so you could tell that that understandably pissed him off. And as people are pointing out on Twitter, or some people are asking, why Republicans? Why is he talking about that? Conservative justices, sure, but why Republicans? Well, it's both, right? So it's a shorthand for both. The justices on the Supreme Court, politically, they are Republican. Ideologically, they are conservative. And they were appointed by a Republican president or Republican presidents, multiple Republican presidents, and confirmed by Republican senates. But moreover, there's also the legislative angle. The fact of the matter is, President Biden has said, right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not, that he would want Congress to pass legislation that would forgive student loan debt that he could sign into law. He thought that would be the quickest, or not the quickest, certainly not the quickest, but the cleanest way to do it. And he's probably right. But Republicans would never allow that. Republicans in the House of Representatives, Republicans in the Senate would never allow that. So I think he is right to point out that both between the conservative Supreme Court justices who made the decision and the Republicans who appointed them and are also preventing any sort of meaningful legislation from passing to that effect, that they have snatched away this sort of relief that's needed by millions of Americans. So we'll see what happens from here, but I imagine two things, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Number one, this further expands the distance between the American right wing, the conservative ideology, and the Republican Party, and millennials and Gen Z and subsequent generations. But unless the president plays his cards right, this could potentially depress the vote, because he's going to have to point to meaningful gains for people like, hey, look, basically saying I tried but didn't get it done. I'm not sure that's going to be enough. I think he's going to have to say, listen, reelect me, expand my majorities, and I will ruthlessly pursue providing you even more debt relief than what I was trying to do via executive action or something. I don't know. I think he's going to have to do both, but we'll see.